Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Spark Festival. I appreciate you being able to find time in your day to listen to the Iron Matrix story. So here's how I thought things might work for the next 30 minutes. I'll start off by giving a bit of background on Iron Matrix, but rather than spending too much time on what Iron Matrix is, I'm actually planning to spend most of the time on explaining why Iron Matrix is the way it is. Because it was actually this journey to where we are today that created a deep sense of meaning and purpose around what it is that we're doing. And we think by sharing this, we might be able to help others find a deeper sense of purpose as well. Because ultimately, I think when you understand why you do what you do, the what actually makes a lot more sense to everyone. And I think that this can help others on a similar journey, not just those who are running startups, but really anyone who's interested in innovation and progress. And I hope we can serve as an example on how people can apply what we did to their own journey. I'll leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions, but let's just get started with a bit of background on Iron Matrix. So my name is David Morgan, so I'm one of the founders and CEO of the company. At its heart, Iron Matrix is a modular steel construction technology that allows anyone to create buildings out of solar panels. So our mission is to generate, store and deliver the cheapest unit of energy on the planet. Now, Iron Matrix is a little bit unique in that rather than being built on a particular product, we actually founded Iron Matrix on a theory. It was a theory that effectively drove my career throughout an oil and gas career over 20 years, and then motivated me to leave that career to start a clean energy startup. Now, the theory suggests that the reason why we have things like business disruption, technological advancement, and even biological evolution is that we're always seeking incremental improvements in the amount of energy we can access while minimizing the amount of energy we use. We refer to this as energy wealth, and it's kind of like financial wealth in that you really want to earn as much energy as possible while spending the very least. And Iron Matrix was developed with this single goal in mind, to maximize the amount of energy wealth. I'll go into details on how it is that we achieve this, but first I'll go through the journey on how it is that we arrived at this theory and why it proved to be so powerful. Okay, so actually this whole journey started within the first year or two of my career. I came out of school with an education in engineering and commerce and started working for one of Australia's largest oil and gas companies. It just so happened that when I started, the company was rolling out this leadership program, and the program had been so successful at the higher levels within the organisation that it was decided to roll it out to the entire company. Now, first of all, what I could see was that no one really wanted to go on these workshops. Everyone was far too busy and far too important to spend a whole week out of the office. But there was something really strange that was happening. People were spending this week away, and by Friday they were having some sort of epiphanies. For some of these people, then by Sunday they were divorced, and by Monday they were handing in their resignations. Now, despite the fact that I had no idea how a company worked or how corporate life worked at that stage, it kind of struck me as strange that this was a way to run a company. So by the time the workshop reached my part of the organisation, I was a graduate engineer at the time. I was pretty curious as to what was going on. So as I would learn later in my career, most of this workshop was about pretty standard organizational psychology stuff, cognitive information processing, preferences, or the things that help people work with better teams within working better in teams within an organisation. But it was Friday that was a little bit different. People had been given the week to reflect on themselves and how they worked within their teams and the wider organisation. But on Friday, they asked a question that was as simple as it was profound. They just simply asked why. Why do you do this? Why do you work here? And why is this work so important to you? Now, the intention was to develop a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, and that the people would then be able to communicate that and inspire others within the organisation. Now, it turns out that a rather shockingly large number of people had never actually thought about it. People with 10, 15, 20-year careers had never really asked themselves this simple question, or just simply forgotten to. Now, it's a mistake to assume that people just simply work for the money. And this is definitely the case in the oil and gas industry, because people are generally paid a lot more than what they actually need to meet their basic requirements. But a lot of people had just simply fallen into a routine. They'd been working for the weekends, always focused on the next report, next performance review, the next promotion. And as a result, they'd stumbled into this point in their life where they didn't really know why they were doing the things they were doing, and it impacted them deeply. So at the end of this workshop, they made everyone write contracts, and these contracts were actually to themselves. So they were basically promises of things that they'd learned during the week that they would take back to the office to make a meaningful difference in how things would be going forward. Now, I didn't have much of a work history at that point, so I made a promise to myself, and it was relatively simple. It was, do not end up like those people. And how I was going to do this was a promise that I would always ask the question why. So this basically became my mantra. I asked why all of the time, and it worked really well for my technical and engineering understanding. I'd learn not only what was required, but why. Why this type of bolt? Why this pump? Why was this valve here? Why is this designed this way? I started doing commercial roles and did exactly the same thing. Why are we spending money this way? Why are we using this process? Now, anyone who's ever worked with or around me at this time is probably laughing to themselves, because they know that this line of questioning can be a tad relentless. And I'm told that being around someone who constantly asks why can be pretty trying, or at least that's what my wife tells me. Some people feel like they're being interrogated. Some people don't want to know why. And some people genuinely believe that faith is a virtue. This wasn't me. One day, someone suggested I read Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Now, I promise this has something to do with Iron Matrix. I'm getting to it very soon. Now, I didn't have high expectations. I was expecting a fluffy self-help book, and for the most part, it was. But the thing that really caught my attention is that it explains typical male behaviour, and it had me pegged 100%. In a nutshell, the book basically suggests that males have a general tendency to want to demonstrate physical competencies, whereas females have, in general, a predisposition to demonstrate relational competency. In times of stress, men retreat to do things, work things out for themselves, and women tend to want to engage more. It's kind of nature's little own game of irony. When things are difficult, the opposite sex needs one thing that the other doesn't want to give. And this was exactly me. And I figured that if it had me pegged so well, then I figured a lot of men were like this. And then, of course, the question was why? So then I started getting interested in evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. And I quickly dropped into that rabbit hole and literally spent years learning about how the process of evolution has shaped our behaviours and instincts, all the things that drove survival and reproduction. And I was really interested in the myriad of ways that it still manifests in our behaviour today. So fast forward a few years, 2009, this whole why thing is actually doing me some favors. I never had particularly good grades at school. I was never really that excellent at anything. I'd like to say to people, the only thing I'm really good at is being average, and I'm damn good at that. Thank you very much. But this desire to know why about everything meant I was starting to build a pretty good understanding of how energy projects works, not just technical and not just commercial, but also this evolutionary psychology was giving me pretty good insights to things like organizational safety. I was enjoying promotions, a greater responsibility, larger and larger projects, and I was traveling all over the world. 2009, I was living in the US, and I would regularly go to fly to visit my girlfriend at the time, who I'm now lucky enough to call my wife. I lived in Houston, and she was in San Francisco, and I would fly there like at least every second weekend. I used to treat that flight like a bus journey. So I'm on one of these flights one day, and I'm waiting for the plane to take off, and I'm flicking through the magazine that's in the seat pocket. And I come across this article that claims that the human race has hit an evolutionary dead end. Apparently, the fittest were no longer having the most children. And I wondered, how could this possibly be? A biological process that had lasted for quite literally thousands of years and made us by far the most dominant species on the planet had just simply stopped. But why? And I couldn't suggest that the claim was wrong. I was a perfect example. I had plenty of income, a big car. I enjoyed lots of overseas holidays, a job I enjoyed, a girlfriend I loved, and as a result of it all, children could not have been further from my mind. But how could this evolutionary process just stop? How could that be? And of course, the question was why. So I wondered this, and I wondered, maybe the goal of evolution wasn't just survival and reproduction. Maybe there was a deeper goal, but what could that possibly be? So I'm contemplating this incongruence as the plane is taxiing for takeoff, as this 500 tons of aeroplane is hurtling down the runway. And I'm reminded that the vast majority of the fuel is used in an aeroplane during takeoff. So over the next 5 minutes, my personal share of aviation gas usage would exceed my entire energy consumption for the week. That was certainly something that I did a lot more of because I didn't have children. I used a lot more energy. Maybe the goal of evolution was actually energy consumption. And it turned out that right there was a single thought that ended up changing my life. At first, I thought it was kind of ridiculous, but just couldn't work out why. Anecdotally, the evidence was in support of it. Biological survival and reproduction was fundamentally a process of protecting and increasing the process of biological metabolism. It's nature's way of converting food into energy. So I became energy obsessed. I'm thinking about the physics and energy of this and energy consumption. This is my game, right? This is not only what I do for a job, this is what I do in my spare time now. And with a background in science and engineering, I decided that I wanted to be able to investigate this as robustly as possible. So the hypothesis was this, that life had evolved as a continuous process to access more energy while using less. And for the last few million years, this had occurred through biological evolution. But over the last few centuries, we humans have discovered far more impactful ways to access more energy while using less. I started to see the same correlations outside nature. Business disruption. When a business gets disrupted, it's because somehow someone has worked out how to deliver a good or service that ultimately allows people to access more or use less energy. This is what gave people a competitive advantage in business as it did in biology. My job was to understand money, and I began to realize that money is just a technology. It's a very important and useful technology, that makes the trading of goods far more efficient, but everything we trade with for money takes energy to create. So this was all still just a theory, and no one would, not one that I knew would be easy to prove. But I felt like it would be easy to disprove. So I actually then started experimenting on myself. I decided to align my whole life with this energy wealth concept: career, finances, relationships. For 10 years, I was all in on why. And now I was all in on what appeared to be the ultimate answer. That was energy wealth. And it seemed to work. Over the course of the next few years, I ended up being promoted into my dream job at 35. It was a job I had aspired to do just before retirement. I had a big job, millions of dollars of spend authority, and I was responsible for pulling together the technical and commercial justifications in support of energy mega projects. Everything seemed to be aligned with the theory, because a good energy project was one that ultimately granted the greatest access to energy while consuming the very least. But soon it became apparent that there was something seriously wrong. While I was able to do a good job on the projects I was working on, I realized that if the theory was correct, that there was a serious problem with the industry. Now, regardless of how hard we tried, oil and gas projects were just getting harder and harder. We were delivering less energy from projects while spending more in the process of developing them. The industry was moving against that energy wealth trajectory. Now, in 2012, solar panels and batteries were still orders of magnitude more expensive than producing oil and gas, but it was the trend that was really interesting. While oil and gas were getting more energy intensive, solar and batteries were getting cheaper and cheaper. So oil and gas is on a scarcity curve. The more we produce, the harder it was getting. Whereas solar and batteries are on a technology curve. The more that gets produced, the easier it gets, the cheaper they get. It did not take a genius to realize that these two things at some point were going to cross over. And it wasn't a question of if, simply when. We still hadn't really shared these energy wealth ideas with anyone, because I still thought it sounded pretty crazy. But I said to my wife that if this theory is in fact correct, one day, and that we always move to the sources of greatest energy wealth, then one day, probably before I retire, we're going to be out of a job. But we had an idea on how it might be possible to actually get ahead and even accelerate that transition. We figured that in order to create a step change improvement in solar panel economics, it might be possible to dual purpose a solar panel as a building material. So one thing a solar panel has that fossil fuels will never have is a flat, impermeable sheet of glass. We weren't going to spend time regretting it. I didn't want to die wondering, so we basically went all in and left the oil and gas industry in 2015. Took 2 years unpaid leave to see if we could either prove the theory is wrong or find further evidence in support of it. The idea was to replace all this roofing and cladding on a building with solar panels. And in order to do this, we had to design a super stiff and strong modular steel structure that was sized correctly to mount tempered glass on it. The structure was designed to have standard solar panels across every square inch of it. The idea was we would maximize the amount of energy that was being generated. But energy wealth has two components to it. So we also knew that we had to minimize the amount of energy used. So the whole structure was designed to be modular, and it's also designed to be manufactured by fast, low-cost robots. It's all flat-packed for transport and can be built by as few as 2 people without the needs for crane scaffolding or heavy equipment. Iron Matrix is ultra-low impact and can be moved and reconfigured at any time. Everything we did was about maximizing energy gained while minimizing energy use. And in 2017, solar panels became cheaper than installed structural plywood. We all went all in, and I fully resigned from the oil and gas industry. And 2018, we raised seed capital and also granted international patents on the iron matrix design. Now, although we had intellectual property assets, the strategy wasn't just to rely on these, because we wanted to make sure that our strategic advantage would be withheld by making sure we use the absolute least amount of energy possible. So in 2019, we developed robots. We built our own manufacturing robots, and we're now able, by the end of 2019, we're able to produce steel here in Western Australia, and we're doing so cheaper than we can get it out of China. Throughout all of this time as well, things like batteries were continuing on a relentless drive lower. And in 2020, the combination of solar panels, lithium chemistry batteries, and iron matrix steel can generate, store, and deliver a unit of energy cheaper than fossil fuels. So today I can confidently say that we're at the beginning of an energy revolution. A revolution the likes of which we've actually never witnessed in our lifetimes, not since the internal combustion engine took over from the horse. Based on my now 20 years of understanding of energy and energy wealth, I can confidently say that if you're going to beat out fossil fuels, you have to do it on the basis of physics. You have to be able to produce more energy while using less. It is all about energy wealth. And this next decade is going to be the most exciting time for anyone who wants to be a part of that revolution. Solar and batteries don't lose efficiency at scale, and they can be deployed in a modular fashion anywhere on the planet. Not only will they deliver the lowest cost energy to you and me, but they'll deliver lower than cost grid electricity to the estimated 1 billion people that currently don't have access to electricity. There isn't a humanitarian issue on this planet that isn't improved by better access to energy, greater energy wealth. Quality of life on this planet is and has always been improved by greater access to energy. For the last century, this has always been from fossil fuels, but that is no longer the case. This desire to access more energy while using less, it's quite literally built into our DNA. We evolved to be like this. And I believe you'll find no greater satisfaction than to be an active participant in this energy transition. I also believe that Australia is ideally positioned to take advantage of this energy revolution. We have an abundance of natural resources, and while we might not have the population of billions, we could end up having billions of robots. Let me finish off by suggesting that I believe if you dig deep enough to try and answer the question why, you'll ultimately discover a desire to access more energy while using less. And when your why is to generate more energy wealth, it's incredibly powerful. You'll be fully aligned with everything that's happened in our past and everything that will happen in our future. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today, and especially everyone who supported Iron Matrix in the journey to this point. You're all part of this energy wealth story. You can follow us. We're on Facebook, and you can find me on LinkedIn. We also wrote a short book, a rather under-publicised book called Energy Wealthy. You can find that on Amazon for $1, or simply email us at the ironmatrix.com website, and we'll be more than happy to send you a copy. Right now, I will move over to any questions. I think we've got another 5 minutes before this session is up. Okay. Haven't seen anyone with a question yet. So anyone who wants to throw anything up is more than welcome to do so, and appreciate the thanks for a presentation. Let me move this over. I will hang around just for another couple of minutes. I'll show you a couple of pictures. These are examples of things where we've actually started putting Iron Matrix into applications. So one of the interesting applications for Iron Matrix is in outdoor media. There is a very close correlation between information and energy. There's more details in the book, but what you find is that energy and information are linked to, like, some of the greatest evolutions that we've gone through were around the printing press and radio signals, and most recently the internet. We discovered that actually you can't process information without actually consuming energy, and this is absolutely fascinating. So things like outdoor media are places where you always want lower cost energy. We're looking at EV charging stations, so anywhere now where you can put solar panels and batteries, basically you have a fuel station for cars. I believe the Cybertruck and four-wheel drive electric vehicles are going to really transform what happens here, especially around camping and spare time in Australia, because you're now going to be able to drive in one direction in the middle of nowhere, which isn't so hard to do in Australia, but you don't have to come back. You can basically charge up your four-wheel drive at location and keep going deeper into the wilderness. It's going to be fantastic. The other things that we're doing is actually working with some remote communities. So this is one of the really heartwarming, fascinating applications for solar and batteries. So people in remote locations currently rely on diesel power generation, and that's orders of magnitude more expensive than solar, than grid powered electricity. But of course, solar and batteries are now giving us the potential to be able to generate and deliver that energy cheaper than fossil fuels. This will help people that already live in these locations, but really interestingly and critically, it's going to unlock all of these places as well. You're going to actually be able to live in locations where you couldn't live before. The difference between having salt water and fresh water is actually energy. It is the sun that distills the oceans into rain that we actually end up drinking. If you have energy, you've got access to salt water. You've got energy, you can effectively live anywhere. I'm just going through a couple of pictures. This is a design we did for a medical centre in Papua New Guinea. Again, somewhere where people can't easily get access, certainly not to grid electricity, and they pay an awful lot for diesel power generation. I just realised that I might have missed a couple of questions. I'll do my best to answer those as we go. If someone fits HVAC on the roof, and would it penetrate the panels? It would. You don't actually need to be able to put HVAC on the roof. The condenser unit, if you have a look at Iron Matrix, we actually raise it off the ground. The condenser unit can actually go underneath the structure. So yeah, you really want to maximize the amount of energy that you get from the power generation, which from the footprint that you've got. So yeah, ideally you're not putting chimneys and anything that kind of penetrates, because any bit of shade is actually going to cut off a solar panel. Someone's got a question here. Ask the life cycle of panels. So manufacturer's warranty are at least 20 years on a solar panel. What you find is that the panel will actually last an awful lot longer than that. The warranty is actually on the power generation, but the mechanical capabilities of that panel will last far, far longer. We're actually an application for recycled solar panels. We'll take your old 72 solar panels because we can turn it into buildings for people. How long do you think, there's a question here, how long do you think it'll be significant, how long do you think there will be a significant oil and gas industry in the world. So I don't think that the oil and gas industry is going anywhere. What I do believe is that it is going to be more and more difficult. There will be less investment because the incremental amount of energy that we produce is going to come cheaper from fossil fuels. So the invested assets are going to stay there. We're going to flog them until they're done. And then basically everything will move to cheaper sources, so places where you get better than energy wealth. Someone's asked a question here if we patented the idea. So we actually patented the structural steel parts. What we do is we've got a component where we can basically remove it, and that's the patent. I realise I'm going to get cut off, so let me just thank everyone for being a part of this. Please feel free to shoot us any questions through at the website, and I thank you all very much for listening in today. And good luck on Energy Wealth Journey.